At 28, I was told by my mother-in-law that I would never be good enough for her son. And for the longest time, I believed her. My name is Clara Jennings, and I married into a family that treated bloodlines like sacred scripture. My husband, Ethan Caldwell, came from a long line of New England aristocrats. Old money, old rules, and even older secrets. The Caldwell's mansion overlooked the coast, its gray stone walls rising against the Atlantic winds like something from a Gothic novel. I used to think it was romantic. Later, I realized it was a fortress, and I was the intruder who'd never be allowed past its walls. When Ethan and I first met at a hospital fundraiser, it felt like fate. I was a nurse, working 2 shifts to pay off my student loans. He was a cardiologist with a smile that could warm any room. We married within a year. My family was small, simple, no estates, no trusts, no silver spoons. Just a hard-working mother and a father who passed too soon. At first, his family tolerated me. His father, Richard Caldwell, was polite in the way men are when they've already decided you're irrelevant. But his mother, Margaret Caldwell, made no effort to hide her disapproval. "You're ordinary, dear," she said the first night I had dinner at their home, as if that were a crime. I smiled through it, thinking she'd come around eventually. She didn't. Months passed. Every family gathering was another test I failed. My accent, my clothes, the way I held a wine glass. And then came the sentence that would echo in my mind for years. One chilly November night, while Ethan was outside taking a call, Margaret leaned across the table and whispered, "You'll never fit our family, Clara. Some bloodlines don't mix. It's just how the world works." Those words hurt more than I admitted. I tried harder after that. I joined their charity events, wore the right dresses, learned their small rituals of grace and etiquette. But no matter what I did, I remained the outsider. Then, one spring afternoon, everything changed. It started as a joke, a family ancestry DNA kit. Margaret had organized a heritage dinner to celebrate the Caldwell's legacy of purity, as she called it. Everyone was supposed to bring their test results to confirm their noble lineage back to the English founders of the family estate. Ethan and I had both done our kits weeks earlier. I didn't care much about ancestry, but I went along to avoid another fight. When the results came in, Ethan read his email first and laughed. "All English and Irish. No surprises here." Then it was my turn. I clicked the link and froze. The screen didn't just show my ancestry. It showed a close family match. One I couldn't have imagined. Margaret Caldwell, 99.8% parent-child match. I remember the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. The world tilted. My husband looked over my shoulder, confused. What is that saying?" he asked. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. "It says, 'Your mother is my mother too.'" Margaret's wine glass fell and shattered against the marble floor. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. Silence hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The dinner table was frozen, forks midair, faces pale, disbelief etched into every feature. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "That's impossible," she whispered, voice shaking. "This is some kind of mistake." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. DNA doesn't lie. Ethan's eyes darted between us. "Mom, what's going on?" She didn't answer. She turned away, gripping the edge of the table like it might anchor her to this world. That night, I didn't sleep. Ethan stayed downstairs with his father, demanding answers. I sat in the guest room staring at the test result on my phone, my mind spiraling through every impossible question. If Margaret was my mother, then who was the woman who raised me? My own mother, Helen Jennings, had died when I was 20. She'd never spoken about my father, and I'd never pressed. We lived modestly, always moving, as if she were running from something. Or someone. The next morning, Margaret knocked on my door. Her eyes were swollen from crying. And for the first time, she didn't look like the ice queen who ruled her world. She looked human. "Clara," she whispered, "we need to talk." She took me into the solarium, sunlight pouring over the white roses she loved so much. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I was 18 when I met a man named Thomas Jennings. He was charming, poor, and kind. Everything my parents despised. I fell in love with him." My breath caught. "Jennings?" She nodded. "Yes, your mother's husband." I felt dizzy. "I was forced to marry Richard Caldwell," she continued. "My parents threatened to ruin Thomas. They arranged for him to be relocated, fired from his job, and I never saw him again. Months later, I found out I was pregnant. My family couldn't risk a scandal, so they sent me away to give birth. And they told me the baby had died." Her voice broke. "You, Clara. You were that baby." I stared at her, words failing me. My mother-in-law, the woman who'd hated me, was my biological mother. Everything inside me cracked open. The resentment, the confusion, the years of feeling unwanted, all tangled into one unbearable truth. When Ethan found out, he was stunned silent. He sat beside me, hand gripping mine, trying to process that his wife was his half-sister. It felt like a nightmare. But the story didn't end there. Later that night, Margaret came to me again, clutching an old leather box. Inside was a faded photograph, a young woman in a white dress holding a newborn. "I kept this," she whispered, "even when I wasn't supposed to." I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream. But instead, I cried. Because in her eyes, I saw the same sorrow I'd carried all my life, the ache of something missing. Still, one question haunted me. Why didn't my mother, Helen, ever tell me? The answer would destroy what little sense of family I had left. A week later, I found myself standing in the small cemetery outside my hometown, facing Helen Jennings's grave. Margaret had come with me, wrapped in a dark coat, quiet as the wind. We'd decided to find the truth together. Helen's sister, my Aunt Ruth, still lived in the same house I'd grown up in. When she opened the door and saw Margaret beside me, her face went white. "I knew this day would come," she said softly. Inside, over the smell of tea and old wood, Ruth told us everything. When Helen found out Margaret had been forced to give up her baby, she'd tracked down the child through a sympathetic nurse, me. Helen, unable to have children of her own, had agreed to raise me as hers, to protect me from the Caldwell's world. "Margaret begged her never to tell," Ruth said. "She thought you'd be safer that way. She was afraid Richard would find out and ruin you both." I felt tears burn down my cheeks. Everything that had felt like rejection, my mother's silence about my father, our constant moving, had been love disguised as fear. Ethan couldn't bear the weight of it all. The marriage was annulled quietly, under medical and legal counsel. It wasn't anyone's fault, but the damage was permanent. Margaret tried to apologize, over and over, but I needed distance. I moved to Portland, started over as a counselor for women navigating adoption trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me. One evening, a year later, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. "Dearest Clara," it began, "I cannot undo the pain I caused, but I thank fate for returning you to me, even if it cost me everything. Know that you were never unworthy of this family. It was we who were unworthy of you. Mother." I read that line again and again, tears falling freely. For so long I'd tried to prove I belonged, to fit into someone else's idea of worth. But the truth was simple. Blood didn't make you family. Love did. I never thought I'd find peace in such a broken story. Yet, as I stood by the ocean one morning, watching the waves crash against the cliffs near my new home, I felt it. A quiet sense of closure. Margaret and I spoke often after that. We never mentioned the mansion or the scandal. Just the small things: recipes, memories, the sound of the sea she once loved. She died 2 years later, and in her will, she left me a single thing: the photograph of her holding me as a baby. On the back, in faded ink, were 6 words that ended the story that began in pain. My daughter. My second chance at love. Sometimes the families we build from love matter more than the ones we inherit through blood, and sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to belonging.